Well, why don't we start with John? You can speak first and Larry second, since that was the order of the nominations.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk a little bit about this campaign and hopefully with your support to help carry the banner as we move forward. Scott gave the perfect speech, and so I just want, maybe you could come up and give it again. In fact, I was hoping if I could get a Xerox copy of it, I have what I need in all of the debates as we go through this campaign cycle. For those who don't know me, I recognize many of you and know some of you, and I've known some of you for many years, but my name is Jonathan Pelto. I grew up here in Mansfield, Connecticut. I went to the Southeast School down the road here at Mansfield Middle School, E.O. Smith, University of Connecticut. I got involved in politics and policy very early in life, working with CCAG to try to stop an electric increase in 1974 when I was 13. Worked on the McGovern campaign, worked on a boycott of Russell Stover candies where we stood outside the local pharmacy urging people not to buy Russell Stover because of their discriminatory practices down in the South where they made their candies. Worked on Chris Dodd's campaigns when I was his youth coordinator. As I mentioned the other day in New London, one of the interesting things was having spent 5 years as Dodd, in essence, his errand boy, got to sit in all of the meetings and gave me a start in politics that was rare since most people don't get a chance to see politics at its best and at its worst. But one thing that struck me all these years later, 45 years later, is that he almost inevitably talked about the importance of defense conversion and the need to begin to shift us from a defense-oriented economy to one that was building train cars and other things that would be useful in a productive society. And here we are, that language has virtually disappeared completely. And while Chris Dodd was probably more progressive then than he ended up being, he was never held out particularly as the most left candidate, and yet even then, whether it was progressives or moderates or even conservatives, we're talking about the need for defense conversion. I was number 2 in Sam Gadenson's first campaign, the Crusade campaign. Sam Gadenson was a young former state representative from Basra. He was 6th in a field of 5. We were running against the governor's son, against the majority leader of the House and the president of the Senate. And in what was one of the greatest campaigns, at least that anybody could ever have been involved in from my perspective, we went ahead and beat the governor's son in the primary and went on to win the Reagan landslide of 1980. And from there, I worked on multiple campaigns at the federal, state, and local level. Spent 2 years with Chris Dodd, the liberal, Gary Hart, the liberal United States Senator from Colorado, who ran for president in '84, and then again a misstep as running for president in 1988. Somewhere along the line, I became what I think still holds the title as the youngest Democratic town chairman in Connecticut history. I was elected to the Connecticut House of Representatives in my senior year at UConn as I was finishing up. Served for 10 years, got up to the number 3 position in the House, and was one of those sort of classic dreams of grandeur of staying involved in politics, albeit from the left as opposed to from the center or the right. And then my first daughter was born, who graduated from college last year, and I brought her into the chamber of the House to introduce her. She was about 10 days old, and one of my colleagues, who I sat next to at the time, leaned over and said he had missed the last 8 dance recitals that his daughter had been in. And I decided that that was a prophetic observation and moment. I resigned midterm, left the legislature, and decided to spend the next 2 decades raising a family and doing all of the things where 50 or 60% of my time is driving kids around and doing all the things that the modern active father does. I tried to explain to them that when I was a kid, I lived just up the road here, about 2 miles, and there was a little grocery store, the Barrows and Burnhams, and they had candy, and we wanted candy, or if we wanted to do something, parents would say, sure, go ahead, just walk down and get yourself some candy. And the idea of getting a ride everywhere, or thousands of dollars worth of dance lessons, or all of the other things that my kids have been able to have was something that, quite frankly, I would never have imagined. Luckily, I didn't know what being a parent was like, or I never would have volunteered to be one. But I then spent the next 20 years being a parent and learning about the really important things in life. And had a public relations company, and then write a blog called Wait What, which I believe has become the most read commentary site in Connecticut. I also founded and coordinate what's called the Education Bloggers Network, 250 pro-education bloggers across the country, including Diane Babbage, our patron saint and titular head, and then people all over the country who are on the front lines of the battle to end the privatization of education and to really begin the process of reinserting public back into public education. To raise issues and to try to educate people about the problems that we face. I was a petitioning candidate for governor 2 years ago against Nana Malloy. I've been called the most anti-Malloy person in the state, which I take as a compliment, although I'm in strong company considering he's the least popular governor in the United States. And it's proven yet again this week why he's that way with his anti-Bernie comments and other things that he said. And I saw firsthand, having been a Democrat and having worked on a variety of important issues like the income tax and campaign finance reform, that the barriers to success was really the barriers to having third parties on the ballot and being able to give people choices. And I saw that firsthand, having spent 2 months collecting petitions and finding that in town after town, in West Haven, Connecticut, for example, more than 50% of the names were rejected. We went down, looked at the list. The first 3 names were voters, clear and certain, but the registrar of voters had knocked them off. And by the time the process was over, when the Secretary of State told us, well, here's what you do. You go through the entire process, you get rejected, you then sue. We will then take responsibility for checking the names, but we won't check the names unless you sue, and the costs of the thousands of dollars that go with that. That was a real eye-opener. And so I had planned to use next year as an opportunity to raise some of these issues again, and realized after talking with Rana and with others that as long as Myrna was fighting at the front lines in New London on education, that the rest of us couldn't stay silent and couldn't use our opportunities, every opportunity that comes up as a way to educate and persuade and mobilize people to speak out. So why I'm running is an opportunity. I said to, when I announced that I'm a friend of Joe Courtney's, I like Joe Courtney, I've given him money, I served with him in the legislature. There are issues that we are fundamentally different opinions about. He voted for the bill that would have banned Syrians from coming into the United States, one of only 2 Democrats in New England who voted for that. He voted for the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is really the continuation of the Every Child Will Be Tested Until They Fail Act. And so while I think he's a good progressive, and I'm sure that he will be successful, and humored by some of the emails and calls that I've gotten of fellow supporters of Joe, who are just outraged and that somebody could possibly want to raise issues that I believe aren't being raised. And I've said to them, in all honesty, that I think under-contested and uncontested races are as much a danger to the incumbent and to society. And having run unopposed in a couple of races, I felt that while it assured victory, it assured that people were more apathetic, more unwilling to get involved in the process. And so I think those who support Joe should be as excited about the chance to talk about these issues as those who would oppose him. But the reason that I'm running, and Scott ran the list, so I'll refrain from that except expand on one issue, and that goes back to the work that Myrna has been doing in New London. If I said this the other day when I was with Jill Stein and had the opportunity to spend the day with her and drive her down to Stanford, an amazing woman, articulate, intelligent, really enjoyed my time. And we had a good talk about education issues, which she was knowledgeable about, but not as knowledgeable as those of us who have been working so closely in it. that the best description was that if Eisenhower had been alive today, Eisenhower, who used his last speech to the people before he turned the Oval Office over to JFK, warned America of the military-industrial complex. And Eisenhower, who had his strengths and weaknesses, was probably more of a seer in that moment than most politicians are in a lifetime. And that is, he recognized that we were on a dangerous course, a course that has, of course, come to pass. Well, the same is true when it comes to the privatization of public education. The education reform industrial complex, the charter school industry, and the corporate education reform allies who are really turning our public schools into little more than testing factories in which the very issues that are important, the very issues that make a difference, are the issues that are being shunned aside and shuttled aside. That we have the ability, whether it's shifting money from the wasteful spending in military back into education, or simply recognizing that without a proper education system, there will be no future that we can count on. And as dangerous as the two party leaders are today, the two nominees for the United States President are today, the greatest danger of all is a population that does not have the kind of skills and knowledge and understanding and comprehensive ability to both live more fulfilling lives and judge where and vote on where we should be going. And so what are those factors? Those factors are poverty, language barriers, unmet special education needs. And instead of working on those, we're moving in exactly the opposite direction. That the wasteful resources that are going to privatize, the wasteful resources that are going to diminish opportunities for poor students, Black and Hispanic, children of color, children who need help with the English language, children who need help with their special education challenges are just one more of the reasons that we need to use this campaign to educate and mobilize and persuade people to step up, stand up, speak out, come out and vote, and create the framework. I'll leave with, if you haven't seen it, I strongly urge everybody to go to Democracy Now!'s website earlier in the week, I think it was the day before yesterday. There was a debate between Chris Hedges and Robert Wright. It was an interesting debate. Chris Hedges was, as usual, right on, absolutely clear, no, take no prisoners, and his putting aside the lies and speaking the truth. Robert Wright was so much on the defensive that it was almost embarrassing as he tried to explain that he had known Hillary for 50 years and that she would be a good president. But that what was interesting to me was not so much what he said to defend it, but how in the end he said, that said, it's time for this country, the progressive movement that he's worked so hard on, he spent much of his time talking about how hard he's worked on progressive issues, but he is a great progressive leader, Robert Wright. He said that he is now convinced that there will never be a successful progressive movement unless there's a third party, and that third party should be the Green Party, should probably be the Green Party. And it struck me that we had come to an understanding within the progressive movement, one that I myself have come to as of late, as I went to the town hall and changed my registration from Democrat. The day I had turned 18, I went down, been a Democratic official, a Democratic Party official, a Democratic elected official, a Democrat my whole life, and with tremendous pride and without any regret, I changed my party affiliation to now where it says Green. And I did that because I too am convinced that we will not be able to change the course that we're on unless we develop the Green Party as the vehicle, whether that begins and continues now in 2016 and 2018 and the years to come. So I'm asking for your support so that I can continue to work on these issues. I look forward to working with each and every one of you. Those of you who would like to be involved in the campaign, I hope you'll give me your name, phone number, and email, because we'd like to set up a conference call in the next week to talk some strategy. For those who could, I'd ask you to write out a check, no matter how small or large, because we want to make sure that we have the kinds of campaign activities that will raise the numbers of people voting for us. We have beginnings of a good strategy, a design to really go after those who have most likely to recognize the importance of voting green. And I look forward to talking with you about all of these issues as we move forward. But most importantly, I look forward to working with you as we operationalize this revolution that we're engaged in, so that we can look back and say, what were the pivotal moments that change occurred here in Connecticut or around the country. And we say there was that day that we met at the Mansfield Library on 2016, where we really made a decision that we were going to go forward in a way that would build on to the victories that we have. And as Chris Hedges says, it was only a couple of years ago that, I'll leave the details to him, but you'll see where one of the countries that he talks about of doing things right with the Green Party leadership, where they were getting 3 and 4% only 6 years ago, and today they're running one of those European countries. So the fact is that victory can be ours. It just requires us to stick with the values that are laid out and to do all of the work that we know how to do and that we've been doing for a very long time. So thank you, and look forward to working with you.
So I know you're busy, thank you. And then you expressed your commitment to thank you guys. Are there other questions? Yes.
Yesterday, I received my periodic email from Joe Courtney, who you have to replace him, and he was congratulating himself on having kept the Coast Guard band in Connecticut. And I responded to him back in email saying, "Excellent. We just have to get rid of those damn submarines." And that's sort of, you applied your position talking about that, changing that, but it's a little more on this difficult district that you represent.
In fact, there's 2 responses that I got that email as well, and my thought was exactly the same. There are 2 different pieces. One is the incredible wastefulness that is taking place in multiple issues, but the incredible waste of resources, of dollars, of talent, building weapons of mass destruction as opposed to tools of productivity. I wrote about it in my blog the other day, and we'll get to the submarines, but I wrote about the aircraft carriers. This new aircraft carrier, you may have read about, or if you saw my blog, the new one is $13.2 billion. It's 25% over budget. It's over 2 years behind. And the head of testing reported that it was nowhere ready, not only for its work as to land incoming planes, take off incoming planes, and in no position to defend itself if it was under attack. And the response from the Defense Department was, yes, they knew that. These issues came up in 2008 when the project was approved and were never addressed. So the amazing answer was, yes, those problems exist, and we haven't done anything about them, and we don't know why you're talking about them now, because they're hardly new. That's $13 billion later, and we have 2 more submarines, 2 more aircraft carriers that have already been approved. And then the next paragraph was, and that doesn't even begin to talk about the problems with submarines that are coming up next. So the irony of, had we actually engaged in some of the defense conversion that could have been taking place starting in the 70s, we now have electric boat building train cars and rail cars, so that when Connecticut decided that it was going to upgrade the quality of the cars, both on Metro North and eventually on the route to Hartford, we'd actually be able to build those here in Connecticut as opposed to getting them from overseas. And even when we're buying used ones, we're getting them overseas because there is no mechanism to build train cars in the United States. So I think that's a perfect example. The second part of the example, where he was complimenting the success of keeping the postcard ban, is that in New London and in Bridgeport and Hartford and many other towns, because of budget cuts, because of the orientation towards turning schools into testing factories, focused exclusively because of federal law, where every child has to be tested every year, and they're tested exclusively on math and English, that we have the process of teaching to the test, developing the curriculum to the test, developing the textbooks to the test, the software to the test, the consultants to the test, the teacher development to the test, now training teachers to only teach to improve test scores, is that when you don't have science, and you don't have social studies, and you don't have art, and you don't have music as part of the mandatory comprehensive curriculum, you're left with the very real situation where he's complimenting himself for saving the Coast Guard band, having voted for a bill that makes it virtually impossible for music to be taught in the London and Groton school system, the Norwich school system, the Bridgeport school system, the New Haven school system. So in towns like my town, where my children were able to take Suzuki, and there's 5 different languages in the middle school, and the children are given all of the opportunities to develop all of the comprehensive skills and knowledge they need to get into the college of their choice and to live more fulfilling lives, the very people who Joe Courtney, and he's not alone. That is, I guess the fairness to Joe Courtney is that every Democrat, virtually every Democrat, voted for the Every Student Succeeds Act. And what the Every Student Succeeds Act is pretty much ensures that poorer children will not get art or music. So for Joe, as an establishment Democrat, as a good guy, to brag about something that is so telling about the failures of Washington is sort of the quintessential example that they just don't get it. And that the way to do it is the very things that are in the values of the Green Party, of the decentralization, along with a tax structure that stops coddling the rich and allows us to pay our bills, the end of militarism, the real conversion of the defense industry, a climate change policy that gives our children and our grandchildren even the hope to have a world that they can grow up in. So there are lots of those kinds of issues, but I thank you for bringing that example up, because if somebody was to say, why should I vote Green this year, you might even print off that email that Joe sent out and said, this is the reason that we should be voting Green this year, because in fact, saving the Coast Guard band is a testament to what we're doing wrong in Washington, as nice and as good as it is that we'll still have the Coast Guard band.
We like them, they play
John, quickly, once you're elected, what would you do to usher up the likes of John King and formerly Arnie Duncan and get into place someone like Diane Ravitch or Linda Darling? A person who could really stand behind the principles of what we think is a decent education. Because I think a lot of my progressive and democratic friends seem to think that, well, the Department of Education is in fact in good hands. Well, we know that clearly it's not. What can we do to usher out the likes of those types of people and those philosophies?
And in fact, there was a movement afoot to try to put more and more pressure on the Democratic nominee to articulate who she would likely, what kind of Department of Education she would have, who she would have as her Secretary of Education. I'm pushing for Karen Lewis, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, because I think that you always want to push the pendulum, push the envelope, push the discussion, so that when it settles back into its midpoint, it's a lot more further along the spectrum. So I think Diane would be great, or Linda Darling, Darling Hammond would be great, but I'm going to continue to push Karen Lewis as the next Secretary of Education. Yesterday, didn't get any press coverage at all, but yesterday the state of New York released their data on their opt-out movement. They had gone from 20% of the students opting out to 24. Almost 1 in every 4 students in the state of New York opted out of the unfair, regressive, discriminatory Common Core testing scheme that is designed, and purposely designed, to fail the majority of students. For those of you who don't really know enough about this, boil it down to one thing. The American education system is now set up to have students take a test that is basically 2 grade levels above where they're at. So that what you get is massive failure. You get massive failure because, as the military-industrial complex said, as long as we're fearing the Soviet Union, we will spend anything to protect ourselves. So what do? You create massive fear that our children are failing. And how do you do that? You give them a test that they will fail at. And then you say, a couple of things have to happen. First off, we have to drop all the other stuff and teach to the test so that we can improve the test scores. Because we want a strong America. So instead of having a strong diplomacy or strong agricultural policy across the world or a strong health policy, we need to focus in on defense, because defense and military is what's going to beat the Soviets. Here we are 40 years later. What's going to beat back the Huns is if our children learn just math and English and not waste their time with everything else. The second thing you do is you rank order every school, every student, every teacher, and you say that the lowest cohort has to be privatized. It's a perfect system because you will always have the lowest cohort. And who are you going to privatize it to? You're going to privatize it to the business sector that knows how to be efficient and effective, meaning they know how to cut services and make profits for a small number of people. There's a story that comes out of Chicago, a number of stories that come out of Chicago, that really prove what's happened, because now 50% of the students in Chicago are going to charter schools. And they're doing worse. And they're doing worse because there's just simply not enough money to deal with the poverty. There's not enough effort to deal with children who have faced English language barriers. And there's not enough money to provide the support for children who are requiring special education services. So what you get is, year after year, in fact, test scores staying flat or now going down, proving to the education industrial complex that we need to redouble our efforts. It's a long-winded way of saying, so how do we change that? Well, in New York, they actually started to educate parents and teachers and students about these issues. That it was a community-based education with faith groups and groups active in communities of color and unions. And there, in fact, there was the statewide teachers union, which was not in favor. The leadership was thrown out and new leadership came in, just like in Chicago, just like in Seattle, Washington, where a new generation of leaders in the unions said, no, we are going to be involved in these issues. And whereas we were fighting to get, in Connecticut, to get 5% of the parents to opt out, in New York, they're 2 years ahead of us, and they're now at 25% opting out. At 25%, everybody agrees it's no longer statistically accurate, and therefore there's no legal way that you can use the test scores to rank schools, to rate teachers, to do anything. And so in essence, a parent uprising, of which the media first blamed it on the unions and now won't even cover it, but a parent uprising on behalf of their students has effectively dismantled the military education industrial complex in New York. And that comes despite a governor like our governor, who strongly supports the privatization of public education. So I think it can be done, but it requires some of the same activities that we're embarking on here with the Green Party.
You know, Jonathan, every time I hear you talk about education, I keep remembering George Carlin saying, the last thing the owners of this country want is an educated populace capable of critical thinking. And, you know, he said owners back 20 years ago or more when he said that. You know, we know who they are, they're the 1%. But I look at all of these federal interventions, interference, in my opinion, in local education, and I look at the results. And what jumps out at me is that everything points to the fact that the underlying purpose of all of this is to open up the huge revenue stream that we have invested in public education in this country for 200 plus years and open that up to the private sector. I don't see any other real purpose for this, and everything I've heard you say corroborates that.
And you know, the idea of you create a common core, which was supposed to be a set of standards that were more challenging, so that we would raise the system up to meet that. But what it really was that you'd have to have all new textbooks, you'd have to have all new software, that you'd have to have all new consultants to sell the software, you'd have to have all new computers, because now the computers don't work. In Greenwich, Connecticut, it's not, you know, what makes your point so accurate, but is also the Achilles heel, is these people are so greedy that they have decided to do everybody's children, which has given us the opportunity, because in the end, children from Mansfield are as much at risk as children in New London, even though the parents of Mansfield may not fully understand that yet. But the kind of pressure that will occur across the board when you have to have new textbooks, new new software, new computers, new internet. So in Greenwich, one of the wealthier towns in the country, for 3 years now, they have used their entire deferred maintenance budget to upgrade their internet system, their computers, because the software that they purchased wasn't able to run on the computers that they got. Here in Mansfield, they bought software to train the children, not the content of what's on the test, because without a lot of poverty, limited language barriers, with a very strong special education program here, children were learning the content. But what they weren't doing was by shifting it to a computer-based testing system, they effectively were making sure that children who didn't have a lot of computer skills, including typing skills, they may have been able to play with the games, but that didn't do any work. The children were dropping down. So what do towns like Mansfield do? They bought a software package that they want the children to be tested 8 times a year. The groups then get pulled out. Which ones need to learn typing better? Which one needs to learn how to go back and forth between screens? So in Lake Wobegon here, where all of our children are above average, they're above average because we have trained them how to take the test. Whereas in other towns, they don't even have the resources to teach the content. And so there is, in essence, a Cold War that will continue to ramp up, which is if we all need computers, then I want my computer to be a lot faster than your kid's computer, because I want them to score much higher, because I want them to go to a better school, because I want them to be closer to the 1%. And so if we don't get all parents involved in understanding that this is a threat to all of them, it also, though, gives us the opportunity, because parents, although many have become feeling that you can just drop your kid off at school and they'll learn, the teachers are great, everything will work out, and then they'll come home and you focus on all of the other non-school activities. I do think, and I'm finding, and certainly New York is proof of this, that parents, when they think that their children are in danger, are forced to be reckoned with. And as parents, we know that our children are in danger more than they ever have been before.
Actually, I will have something soul food.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
What, Jonathan, you were a tough act to follow. Actually, all you young folks running for office, watch this guy, listen to this guy, learn how the speaking process is. As part of what you all need to learn as to be good candidates is to connect with people, to be able to turn a question into what you want to say. There's a bunch of great technique, things like that. So please don't just make notes on ideas. Keep a separate part of your paper there for how does this person